checkpoint at the entrance of the provincial capital of Iraq's central province of Salah ad-Din Tikrit. Tikrit, which lies 150 kilometers north of Baghdad, was liberated at the hands of Iraqi security forces in March 2015. 2 explosives, rigged vehicles, and 3 bombers reportedly targeted a police motorcade, killing 8 dozen people and injuring many more. Though the attack was not immediately claimed by Daesh, many say it was in response to the army's liberation of the key district of Ash-Sharqat north of Tikrit and south of Mosul days ago.
The battle for Sharqat is settled. The Iraqi security forces are eliminating pockets of terrorists in and out of the city. Villages are falling like dominoes. This is a clear indicator of the high level of resentment people living under Daesh have toward the terrorists.
The liberation of Sharqat came 2 days after the key district of Jazirat al-Baghdadi northwest of Baghdad was retaken from Daesh after 2 years. The liberation of Jazirat al-Baghdadi has sent away terrorists to areas close to the Syrian borders.
The recent liberation operation are preludes to a decisive battle to retake Mosul. The gains also allow the Iraqi army reinforcements to flow straight and strong into the province of Nineveh.
The next destination for the Iraqi army's liberation push is expected to be Hawija, east of Mosul. The recent victory scored by the Iraqi forces in the western province of Anbar and north of Iraq's central province of Salah ad-Din have prompted Daesh militants to establish newer posts and set up tunnels and trenches on the outskirts and inside the city of Mosul to strengthen their positions and defense lines. This, as experts say, the battle to retake the key city could be only weeks away.
It has now greenlit a $1.15 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia. $1.15 billion with the B. That is a big number. Somebody is about to get rich and somebody is about to die. Or many people, because that's what these are. These are weapons of war. They are not meant for just, hey, for rolling around in the sands of Saudi Arabia. These are meant for killing people in the sands of Saudi Arabia. It says here, according to RT, they report that the U.S. Senate gave the go-ahead for a $1.15 billion sale of tanks and other military equipment to Saudi Arabia by blocking the bill opposing the controversial transaction. They write here that the Senate voted 71-27 against the resolution to block the billion-dollar sale of tanks, guns, and other military equipment. They write the resolution was put forward by Senators Rand Paul and Chris Murphy, who argued that Saudi Arabia's role in the conflict in Yemen and its human rights record make a problematic recipient of American arms. They write the Pentagon announced last month that the State Department had approved the potential sale of more than 130 Abrams battle tanks, 20 armored recovery vehicles, and other equipment to Saudi Arabia. In addition to human rights concerns, Paul and Murphy argued the sale might fuel ongoing regional arms races. Wow. The military-industrial complex just moves along. Just continue. That's what they do. $1.15 billion Saudi money being dumped into America, into the military-industrial complex. How many lives are going to be lost because of that contract?
Forces have seized strategic territory to the north of the city, marking the first major ground advance of an offensive to retake rebel-held zones and bring all of Aleppo under Assad regime control. These pictures, provided by Syrian government-controlled media, purportedly show the battle for Handarat, a former Palestinian refugee camp in rebel hands for years. It overlooks one of the main roads into Aleppo, where residents of the rebel-held half say warplanes have unleashed unprecedented firepower. Early this morning, this man says, President Assad's forces hit us with a powerful missile that shook everything, killing 7 children and their mother. There's no civil defense or first aid. He's destroyed the country and killed many people. There are still many under the rubble and we continue to pull them out. Fresh destruction like this has dealt a bitter blow to any hopes of reviving a short-lived truce. It's unclear whether Syrian or Russian warplanes are behind the new wave of fierce airstrikes said to have left dozens of people dead.
Took part in deadly coalition airstrikes in Syria's Deir ez-Zor province on Saturday. Our correspondent Polly Boyker's got the detail.
Well, they said that we're fully cooperating with the coalition investigation, and they added that the UK would not intentionally target Syrian military units. So not too much information there, but according to news reports here in Britain, it was a UK Reaper drone that was involved. But this mistaken airstrike has caused a lot of damage, and not just in terms of the number of people that died, which was, by the way, 62 Syrian soldiers. Diplomatically, we're seeing quite a big row break out over this. This was an operation that went very wrong. It was launched in an area where the Syrian army was surrounded by ISIL militants, and as soon as it happened, the Russian military contacted the US, explaining that they'd hit the wrong target, but still, in the chaos that ensued, ISIL were able to gain some ground as a result of what happened. The Syrian government is so upset about this that it's accused the US-led coalition of basically helping Islamic State in Syria. It's fair to say that the Russian side is pretty exasperated as well. Moscow's been saying for a long time that they would like the US-led coalition to coordinate its military efforts in Syria with the Russians, precisely in order to avoid situations like these, which is why Russia has called for an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. And that's where this row has escalated, because the US is dismissing Russia's calls for that UNSC meeting as some sort of a stunt. They're kind of inferring that Moscow is milking this situation, or sort of reveling in the fact that the US made such a major blunder. Washington's trying to play down the incident. The US has offered condolences and has insisted that it was a mistake, one that they will try to learn from. But what is now becoming clear is that this was a mistake that a number of the coalition countries were involved in. We've had that admission from the British. Earlier, we heard the Australian president confirming that his country's jets took part in the strike, and the Danish have said that their aircrafts were involved as well. So it's making that ceasefire in Syria look pretty tenuous right now.
Yeah, Polly Boyker, they were following the airstrikes in Syria, which came during the US-Russia brokered ceasefire ongoing in the country just about. Washington's started to try and shift the blame somewhat after US officials questioned the credibility of their partners in the peace talks.
We have to get the facts of exactly what's happened, who struck whom and how today. I think what's critical is the Russians need to be more serious about getting the Assad regime to adhere to the terms of the ceasefire, which began last Monday.
We've been talking for months, if not years, about how Russian credibility is on the line.
And they're calling this emergency meeting? Really? Now, because of a single airstrike.
Based on our collective experience here in observing the situation inside of Syria over the last year or two, I think we'd have some reasons to be skeptical.
If we determine that we did indeed strike Syrian military personnel, that was not our intention. and we, of course, regret the loss of life.
Well, let's try and get the backstory here, get the view live from Damascus there. Michael Raddy, co-editor of BS News. Hi, Michael. Thanks for being with us. You've heard the various sides saying what they think has happened here. There are various nations involved in the Syrian airstrikes. How difficult is it really going to be to get down to the pinpoint of who is responsible for this?
I suspect it'll be actually impossible to get to the truth, since the coalition is doing its own investigation on what they're calling a blunder or a mistake or an accident. The US has got enough air power and surveillance equipment to actually do this strike on its own. If that's what it was intending, to strike ISIS, it could have done it on its own. Instead, it involved at least 3 other countries' military, including Danish, the Australian, and the British obviously were there for their Reaper drones doing the surveillance. That to me says that they did that deliberately. They involved the coalition to create plausible deniability, to make it look like it was easy to bungle an effort, that there was communication problems between the at least four countries involved. But we know that the Syrian Arab Army in the location, they've been there for 2 years. They haven't moved their position, and this is the 3rd time that the coalition has struck the Syrian Arab Army. This one is particularly egregious because of the severe loss of life. I think the numbers are up to 83 now and over 100 injured. So this was a devastating attack, and I honestly believe that this was deliberate. This was not a bungled attempt to hit an ISIS target.
You aren't the first to have said that today. I've had many guests on that have said more or less the same thing. But what's the end game? What was the aim of it, if that is the case?
I think that the Americans had to do some face saving. We saw that they were sort of chased out of towns effectively in northern Syria in the last few days with their so-called rebels, their proxy armies, calling them imperialist and crusading pigs. I think that the US was making a statement to its proxy armies to say, we are on your side, we are against the government of Syria, and we are there for you. We are your unofficial air force. That was the point that was being made. It's interesting that there was a social media activity by Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch, and he said that the attack and the loss of life, the killing of soldiers, was due to the intransigence of Bashar al-Assad. Now, that strikes me as meaning that he thought originally that this was a deliberate attack.
Mike.
Once the US began saying this was an accident, Ken Roth deleted his tweet.
Mike, as you're talking to us, there's a line actually that's just come in. I want to get another handle on it. I want to get another source. But we're hearing from our team producers here, the Syrian military has now declared the 7-day ceasefire period over, and doesn't go on to say whether or not it'll be renewed. That's certainly bad news, considering all the build-up that went up to this, up to weekend before last, trying to broker this ceasefire to get in some aid, especially to Aleppo. But looks like, but we want to get more meat on this. The line just coming in now to break to our viewers that it looks like this 7-day ceasefire is over. Boy, that's bad news. Your initial reaction to that, if it is true, as it appears to be?
My initial reaction is why wasn't the provisions of the ceasefire actually published? This was all being vetoed by the US. This could have been published a week ago. There was something in that document that the Russians wanted everyone in the world to know that the US kept blocking. I don't know what it was, but it was obviously something to do with, or it was going to highlight the fact that some of the groups are obviously supported by the US and the coalition and the Western countries. Whatever that was, we may never know now. I think that the Russian government, Lavrov and Putin, should just publish the document as it stands. Obviously, they're very crude chess players in terms of international diplomacy. That may not happen, but it would be interesting to find out what was the stumbling block for that document, ceasefire provisions, that it was never published in the first place.
For a strategic refugee camp. The rebels seen here are said to have retaken the Palestinian camp to the north of the city in a counterattack, this despite bombing from government forces which had seized ground earlier. Meanwhile, planes have continued to bombard rebel-held districts of Syria's second city. Opposition activists accuse government forces of dropping barrel bombs from helicopters. At least 6 children were killed in one district, according to one report. More than 90 civilians were reported killed on Saturday as Damascus, backed by Russia, continued its bombing offensive on the besieged city. 30 rebel groups, including the Free Syria Army, have said negotiations under present conditions are meaningless.
in Syria after its trucks were hit during a deadly air raid near Aleppo. At least 18 of the 31 vehicles which contained wheat, medicine and winter clothes were destroyed in Monday's attack while en route to the town of al-Kubra. 12 aid workers and drivers were reportedly killed. The UN says the convoy had proper permits and was clearly marked. It has called for an investigation into the attack, with one official warning it could amount to a war crime if the strike was found to be deliberate. Aid deliveries to besieged areas were a key part of a ceasefire deal brokered last week by the US and Russia. But only a few hours before the attack, the Syrian military declared in a statement that the truce had come to an end.
The Russians need to control Assad, who evidently is indiscriminately bombing, including on humanitarian convoys. So let's wait and see. We'll collect the facts. We need to see where we are, and then we'll make a judgment.
Despite accusations to the contrary, Russia's defense ministry has denied the attack was carried out by either Syrian or Russian aircraft.